now. Right, recording has started, so I'll just briefly introduce Richard. Now, for many of you here, Richard Simcott will require no introduction at all. He's an amazing polyglot. He's studied over 50 languages. If you listen to him on YouTube, you'll notice not only does he speak all his languages very well, but also he's really good with accents as well. So often when I listen to him speaking German or speaking Dutch, I can believe that he actually has grown up speaking those languages as well. And today he's going to be talking about learning your colleagues' languages. So Richard, I'll hand over to you, and whenever you're ready, please fire away.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and thank you for inviting me. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you very well, Richard.
Excellent, thank you very much. Otherwise, it would be a very boring thing for you to listen to silence for 30 minutes. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for letting me be part of this. I'm really excited to see the combination of languages and science, as I was the first time you invited me to speak at such an event. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit differently about languages than I normally do. And that's because the whole science aspect added to languages, I think, makes me think of the scientific method and how we need to take a slightly different stance and a critical approach to pretty much everything we do. I mean, in science, you're often just trying to prove yourself wrong to make sure that your theories and ideas stand up. So it's always testing things. And so when we're talking about language learning, there is a little bit of that that's healthy to do too. And I find that particularly because languages are not just things that we use to communicate our ideas. They're not just things that we use as tools. They are also something quite personal. They belong to communities of people, to tribes, to groups, to families, to individuals. It has a lot of baggage attached to it, speaking a language. So I want to sort of talk to that during this and what kind of considerations and thoughts that go through our minds, and see if we can just shift our thoughts and ideas a little bit by the end. And I would love your questions and thoughts when we get to the end of the presentation. So the very first thing, if this will allow me to move, here we go, is we hear different languages and meet different people. And what we do is we see the difference. We see this difference in other people. And that can spark many different emotions. Some people find it quite fearful. Some people find it intriguing and want to learn more. In a language context, particularly if we like learning languages, we see this as an opportunity to start to learn about the differences. And so seeing something that is different, should I say, is something that we can often find as appealing. And I know I fit into that category, and it's something I would love to know how you feel when you see something different too. Then we have this thought, this idea of what we do with this difference when we see it and perceive it. Is it something we embrace? Is it something we want to move towards? Does it spark an idea of what we want to actually go and do now that we've got this difference that we've seen in our lives? Many of us think that this is an opportunity to start building bridges. So we start to bridge the gap, the difference gap between us and the person or the people, or even the new place that we've moved to move towards each other and to bridge these differences. And I think this is something that we see with language learning, that language learning is often seen as a bridging opportunity to really bring us closer as human beings, as individuals, even as groups, or if you move to another country for yourself, to grow closer to the new local community. What we then do is we see that friendships can start to appear from that. So we reach out to these people and we hope that we can interlock our fingers in this way, to just join together, to start that whole process of bringing a closeness. And language is a very good way of doing this. But sometimes we do get tied up. We get tied up in our own worlds and our own thoughts of how we perceive things, people, the world, and these communities. And we have our own things going on. We have our work, we have our families, we have our other circles of friends. We have other activities that we partake in. And so we kind of just sort of stick in our own virtual reality world and lose sight of actually what's going on around us and what other people's virtuality real worlds actually look like. We see paths, we might see beauty in these paths because they're not straight and they're not what we're used to looking at. But what we don't see is what happens when the path dips in between these trees. We don't see the things hiding behind the trees. We don't see the dangers. We don't see the things people are worried about. We don't see the things that are connected to the language, the culture, the people, the friendships, the outside. And this can be really important. I'm going to stop here for a second and just give you some insight into what this means in certain countries. There are countries around the world, the United Kingdom, my country of origin, where you're sitting today in person, is one of these countries. It's a country that's dominated by one language on the whole, and that language is English. Now, many of you who just speak English or speak English at a native level may not perceive this. Others of you in the room may perceive this. What happens when you speak another language in an English-speaking context in the United Kingdom is that you can feel a social pressure to conform. And when you speak another language, you feel conscious, self-conscious. So these dips behind the trees can actually be quite unpleasant when you dip into your mother tongue, native tongue, family language, heritage language, or even language of other friends and partners. What we don't see often as language learners and enthusiasts is when that happens, because for us, we have this privilege of being able to see it from every point of view, where when we learn the language, we seem really good and educated and great, but for the person whose language it is, they often experience this from behind the tree. And this is our inside look into the outside world. We look at the world from our inside. We do not and possibly cannot fully appreciate what the world actually looks like from another point of view, because we're wrapped in our own skin. We're wrapped in our own experiences. We're wrapped in our own environment, our own makeup, our own history. And so we see things from very different points of view depending on our packaging. Balance is really key. So when it comes to us as individuals, some of us feel that we do need to balance these things quite carefully. So what we do at work, what we do at university, what we do at home, what we do when we're out and about in town, what we do when we go home to another home country or a home country, or when we travel, there's a very tight balancing act between how we're perceived and how people perceive us. A very current situation at the moment would be Russian speakers speaking Russian outside in many, many countries. Let's pretend you're a Russophile and you really want to speak Russian. But these people, depending on their personality type, depending on who they are and where they are, may feel very conscious about speaking Russian and being perceived as a Russian speaker because of ideas that are linked and intrinsically draw very strong and raw emotions because of what's going on in the world today. So these balances that we have can also shift and change, and it only takes a wind to knock them. As language learners, it's really important that we're aware of these really delicate ecosystems within language and culture around the world. Life is complex. It just is. It's languages, as many of you will know, are things that I really enjoy learning, and I have experienced many good things. But I also take a very large pinch of this reality of things that I've seen, where me learning a language and me understanding my privilege is super, super important. Languages and building friendship groups and communities. This is what we often associate with language learning, and speaking to people in a language that maybe isn't the community language. So if we see an individual and we are excited about speaking the language, we may need to also just measure, when do we do this? Do we do this when other people are around? Or do we do this as something we agree with that person? Because if we do it when it's in a group, one of those hands could very easily slip away and they no longer feel part of the bigger group. It can be quite a challenging thing. It's definitely context related. Countries like the UK, countries like France, countries like Spain, countries like Germany, where many people will go and speak other languages, in certain contexts, if you do, it means you pull your hand away from the group. And this isn't something to say we shouldn't use them. Of course, I would definitely want to buck the trend, but not every individual feels comfortable doing that. So maybe a one-on-one, talking and taking aside one of your colleagues if you're interested in their language, their heritage, their culture, and talking to them and doing that in the language of the environment first. And then telling them about your genuine interest, because very often outside of the one-on-one group, people will approach you out of the blue in public if they hear you speaking a language and ask you straight out, where are you from? And it's not a, oh, where are you from? I'm really interested. I'd like to go there on holiday. It's a, where are you from and why are you here? Because the language has marked you as different and as outside of the group. Language has this ability to mark you as part of or outside of any community. It's a thing that's used and politicized across the world. And so taking time to speak to an individual in person to see how they feel about this is really worthwhile. It also shows a more genuine connection and desire to learn the language. You could find that they're a person that wants to and is happy with being part of, but also different within a community. But not everybody feels the same way. So when we think about seeing different, remember always that seeing different is not the same as being different, because the person who's different, the person who stands out, is the person that has to live with the reality of standing out and not fitting in 100% to that society. And that's a very different life to live than it is for us as just people who are intrigued with language learning. Now, thank you for listening to this presentation, but I do want to also add something else to this, because the inspiration really was drawn from my own experience, and I want to share that with you. When I lived in Chester in the UK, my wife and I have always, and did while we lived in the UK, use Macedonian as our home language. And we got a lot of very negative responses from British people because we spoke Macedonian. Now, some of you may think, well, why would that be? Well, because it was often perceived as Polish. And speaking Polish in the UK, in the years after 2004, when Poland joined the European Union, was not a popular time for Polish speakers in the United Kingdom. In fact, they were seen as taking over. They were seen as opening up Polski sklep on every street, in every town. It wasn't something that was popular. They were taking our jobs. They were undercutting tradesmen. These kinds of things are the things that you heard about Polish people. So speaking a Slavic language, like Macedonian, was not a popular thing. The question of where you were from was not a question of, oh, I'd love to visit there one day. It was a, where are you from and when are you going back? Where are you from? And we would speak with our daughter too in Macedonian. I spoke to her in French on my own, but as a family, our language is Macedonian. And when we go out, that was all we ever really experienced. Every now and again, there would be sort of a little diamond within the sand, the grains of grey sand, where they would genuinely care and want to know and be intrigued and ask questions that were kind. But unfortunately, those diamonds were absolutely dimmed by the sea of grey, of quite negative feedback. Now, the important thing that I want to illustrate with this story is that that's one of the languages that I speak at home. Another one that I speak at home with my daughter is French. Now, when I went out with my daughter and spoke French and went to the local library, the interesting thing was that mothers particularly would approach me as a parent speaking French to their child outside the house and ask me if I would really think it would be a good idea to set up French groups for all of their children to learn French. Because obviously French is more of a prestigious language in the United Kingdom. So you're faced with this very different experience depending on where you're from. Not all foreigners are the same. Not all languages are the same. Not all experiences are the same. And so not all of the reactions from all of the people are the same. I still encourage you all to reach out and have those one-on-one conversations, to start a conversation about what it's like speaking another language. And if that person is interested and open and willing for you to learn. I also encourage you to do the reverse. I've heard stories of scientists moving to countries like Germany, where they basically are forced to speak English the whole day and desperately want to fit in, but they're forever forced to be that different flower in the field because no one wants to speak German with them, even though the majority language of the people would be German. English is the language of work. But the consideration for that person standing solo in a field full of red poppies and being the one sticking out remains, and not much is done about it. So consider the poppy that doesn't fit in the field in the same way and is immediately noticed, and think about how you can make the difference and reach out either way, by including with language, by excluding with language, by showing compassion with language. Compassion always wins.